All right, let's wrap up Kelly's personal construct theory by discussing a little bit about how he thinks healthy personalities develop versus unhealthy personalities. So let's start off first by making a comparison between Kelly and Freud. So Kelly rejected Freud's notion that past trauma is the source of all of our psychological disorders. Freud started from the very beginning, how you were weaned or how you were potty trained would be these sources of trauma that could cause healthy or unhealthy behaviors in adulthood, right? Kelly thought that was ridiculous. He really thought that psychological disorders, especially depression and anxiety, were more attributable to things that are going on right now. He thought that anxiety is the most common of all clinic commodities. He really thought that the most people who are coming to see psychologists and psychiatrists at the heart were suffering from anxiety, even if they were presenting as having something else going on. And he really thought that anxiety came from a mismatch between our internal constructs and then what life is really like, right? Like maybe we had construed life as being one way, but we keep getting information that actually it's wrong, that our construal was wrong, that life is actually something else, and that generates anxiety, he said. A healthy personality, according to Kelly, will always be generating new constructs to replace our inadequate ones. We will always be looking for information out in the environment and updating our constructs as needed so that we'll have the best match possible between reality and how we understand reality. Anxiety stems when we have a mismatch, and he says that disorder really comes when we stubbornly refuse to update our constructs, but instead keep saying, no, 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 the way that I believe the world is how the world is, but oh no, look at all this evidence that I'm wrong. Look at all these things that keep happening that aren't congruent with my constructs. So it's healthy in a healthy personality to be updating information all the time. I'm going to give you one of my famous analogies where I'm trying to make something concrete that's really not a concrete thing, but hopefully something that you can relate to, right? We all have just been going through COVID, and there are pieces of advice that our health professionals were giving us back in March of 2020 that within a year they were telling us weren't the best strategies or didn't really matter. Like I remember very early in the pandemic, there was a lot of emphasis on you could catch COVID from touch, right? So people were sanitizing things and hand washing and things like that. And once they realized that it wasn't contagious via touch very well, it was more about droplets. And they updated the health advising, there were people who didn't want to hear that update. They saw it as the medical professionals not really knowing what was going on, and you told me this and now you're telling me something different, and so therefore you were wrong and now you are wrong again. And also it wasn't even just about like that side. There were also people who stubbornly cling to the original advice. And so there are still people today who believe that they've got to sanitize their mail and things like that because, you told me in March of 2020, and I am not going to update my construal. I'm going to continue to see the world through this lens. That would be an example, a very concrete example of what Kelly's talking about, this, sort of refusal to update the constructs as needed. Like the healthy personality will update as needed. I'm going to give all of us I'm going to give us 2021 as a free pass because we were still kind of in it, and especially like winter of 2021, it was a very dark time, I would like to argue. And so if we didn't know what to do, who to believe, and what was happening, I think that was very reasonable of us because we didn't know what was going on and who to trust and what was happening. But a year out from that, there are still people who are sort of still in that anxiety, still doing things because they don't want to sort of reconstrue based on the new evidence. They want to sort of say, I have to be consistent and keep up what I had been doing, or keep up or criticize people who want to change. All right, we're going to take another, sort of topic shift, and we're going to illustrate something by doing it concretely. So what I would like you to do, if you can, is grab a piece of paper and a pencil and play along with me. what I need you to do is number your paper from 1 to 18. And I'm going to read off a series of adjectives. If an adjective that I read off describes you, you'll make a check mark next to the number on your paper. If it doesn't describe you, just leave it blank. Okay, so I'm just going to read a series of adjectives. I'll say the number and then I'll say the adjective. Check mark if you think it describes you. Leave it blank if it doesn't. Okay, so grab your paper and pencil. Pause me if you need to. I'm going to go kind of fast. Hopefully we're back. I'm going to go kind of fast just reading them. I want you to go with your gut reaction. So I'll give you a tiny beat of time, but just go ahead and just make a check mark. Don't think too hard. Just make a check mark if it sounds like you. Leave it blank if it doesn't. All right. Number 1, forceful. 2, quiet. 3, generous. 4, dominant. 5, tender. 6, loyal. 7, independent. 8, compassionate. 9, adaptable. 10, courageous. 11, cheerful. 12, secretive. 13, principled. 14, romantic. 15, responsible. 16, dynamic. 17, forgiving. 18, careful. Okay, now what I want you to do is hide that little list from yourself. All it should have on it is check marks. Hopefully you didn't write any words down or anything. But hide that little list from yourself. Like fold the piece of paper over, something like that. Or get an entirely new piece of paper for this next step. What I want you to do is pause me and then write down as many words from that list that I just read as you can in any order. So go ahead and pause me and go ahead and do that little memory test. All right, hopefully you wrote everything down that you could possibly remember. I should have given you a time limit. I usually limit my students to 1 minute, but it's pretty self-limiting because you get tired of trying to think of anything. So now what we're going to do is check your accuracy, basically, of like what you wrote down compared to what I said. So these are the words in the order that I originally read them. And so you just want to make sure that everything that you wrote down really was on this list. Because sometimes we write down stuff that the words weren't even really on the list. Okay, and so now the next phase you're going to do, again, you're going to have to pause me to make this happen. So this is the order in which I read the words. Get out that list that you made with the check marks and look to see which of these words you had marked as describing yourself. Then look at the words that you generated in your free recall test. And what we're going to ultimately try to figure out is whether you recalled words that described you. So that means you recalled the word and you had put a check mark next to it when we did the first part of the test. Did you remember more words that described you than words that you had left blank and that you didn't indicate described you? So that's what you're going to want to figure out. And the way to figure it out is by putting a tick mark if it was a word that you recalled and was a word that you gave a check mark to. Put a tick mark in the next box if it was one that you recalled but you hadn't put a check mark on the blank. Put a tick mark over here if you didn't recall it but you put a check mark on the blank. And then in the bottom right hand corner you'll put a check mark if you didn't recall it and it wasn't and you hadn't put a check mark on the blank. So go ahead, if you have to repeat my instructions, go ahead and do that, but otherwise just pause me and try and fill in this little table and I will see you after that. All right, so hopefully you did that and you played along. What most people will discover is that they remember more of, on this recalled yes row, they remember more of the ones that they check marked than they didn't check mark. So what you're really interested in is making a comparison between the two columns of that first row. The yes, I recalled it. Compare the ones that the number that you recalled when you had put a check mark on the blank versus the number that you recalled when you didn't put a check mark on the blank. For most people, they will remember more words that describe them than ones that didn't describe them. And then they typically will have more in the no, I didn't recall it, and no, it wasn't one that I marked, and fewer tick marks on no, I didn't recall it, and yes, it described me. Yes, there was a check mark. So it's kind of a complicated little setup. So you might have had difficulty filling out this table. But what we're really trying to figure out is if you remembered more words that were self-descriptive than words that weren't self-descriptive. This is something that that really taps into this issue of schema theory, self-schema. The word schema refers to these cognitive structures that we carry around with us. They're based on our past experiences, our knowledge of the world, and they help to direct our attention to relevant aspects of the environment, right? So the things that you've experienced in life help you to determine what is probably going to be important in a similar circumstance in the future. If you've had an experience like this in the past, you already know what to look for. Or if in the past something important has happened at a certain time of day, you'll expect that something important might happen again at that same time of day. Those kinds of things. Our schema are built on each other. They start to tie together and really are added to based on experience. So like little kids have very rudimentary schema. They don't really understand how the world works at all. They don't have enough experience to really make good predictions or anything like that. For us adults, we've had a lot of experience, and as you age and you have more experiences, your schemas will continue to grow. These cognitive structures allow for faster processing because we aren't surprised anew every time we enter a similar circumstance. We have expectations. Like as an adult, and let's say you're going to go to a athletic event at a big stadium, it's a lot less shocking that you could maybe enter in lots of spots than it might be to a child who's maybe only been to a high school basketball game with one entrance and one exit, right? The fewer things will surprise you. You're going to be able to make better decisions quickly as you age and you have more experience with the world. These schema give us better memory also because these cognitive structures serve as a way to organize our memories, put everything together in a way that we can find information more quickly. Now, under the header of schema, there's a special kind of schema called a script. A script is a schema that applies to some kind of familiar ritual. So, going to a restaurant, for example, you have a script for what you're supposed to do if you go to a sit-down restaurant. Let's say you're supposed to wait at the hostess table and they'll seat you, and usually they'll hand you your menus, and you wait for the server to come and take your order, and there's just this order of things that are going to happen, and you know what's likely to happen next, right? So things aren't that surprising or doesn't take that much cognitive effort to process that information. I've been watching YouTube a lot, since I got better internet service, and there are a lot of these reaction videos that have been popping up in my feed for some reason, and watching people from other cultures look at how we do things in the United States is kind of interesting because you sort of what you're used to makes sense. And I was just watching one recently that was talking about how we tip at restaurants and how surprising that is in other parts of the world. But it's just part of the ritual. We have it as part of our script that you leave some money for the server. It makes it not surprising. It makes it so you don't even have to think about it. Still some math involved in that, but you don't have to think about it. So the demonstration that I gave you right before I showed you this slide, right, where you were trying to recall words and rating whether they described yourself or not, whatever. Our self schema is our most elaborate schema. we are with ourselves all the time. You can't escape you. So you see yourself across lots of different circumstances. You see yourself having lots of different kinds of experiences. You know, some of them are boring, some of them are exciting, some of them are educational, some of them are purely fluff. I mean, there's just, you see yourself where you have to talk in front of people, and other times when you don't. Like, you just have all sorts of different experiences with yourself. And so you have all these details that are encoded about yourself. When new information comes in, if you can tie it to yourself, you will remember it better than if it doesn't relate to you. And that's typically the explanation for why people tend to remember more of the words that they had check marked during that demonstration than the ones that they didn't check mark. The things that relate to ourselves are the best remembered pieces of information. It's what we call the self-referencing effect. If it refers to us, we tend to remember it better. All right, let's go ahead and stop there, and we will come back and talk about categorization.